old for video games?
You have failed.
The same way, I will destroy you. And my friend is truly dead.
Now this is pod racing.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Urza Master of the Jedi. Joining me as always, Jedi Master Psyllium Maas and Lord Uther of the Jedi Order. This is the Graying Jedi. And tonight we are discussing Ahsoka, Episode 7. We are one episode away from having completed the Ahsoka series, and I have to say, there's a lot to unpack in this episode, as we are at the end, it seems, of the WGA strike. They have reached a reasonable end, as we had hoped for. SAG-AFTRA continues, and of course the UAW also continues, but we hope for swift ends with fair outcomes for all. With that, we journeyed into a galaxy far, far away last time, or began such journey. We've met our adversary, Grand Admiral Thrawn, the blue and the red combined.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yet, we didn't get much in terms of action in the last episode, but this episode, our titular hero has entered that galaxy far, far away, and with background and information, I turn it over to my fellow Jedi Master, Psyllium Maas.
Thank you, Urza Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks to you all here, abroad, and in galaxies far, far away. We are on episode 7 of Ahsoka. It was directed by Geeta Vasant Patel, who first attracted attention with a celebrated and award-winning documentary in 2014 called Meet the Patels, and would later go on to direct episodes of television, most notably Superstore, Fresh Off the Boat, The Great, and HBO's Game of Thrones spin-off House of the Dragon. Of course, Dave Filoni wrote this episode, as he has written the previous 6 installments. 3 guesses who will be writing the season finale next week.
David Lynch. Oh, we were supposed to guess, I guess. I said David Lynch. Why not? I mean,
Why not? That would be wild.
Bring that man back.
John
So
Waters?
we're gonna start. Yes, John Waters. That would be amazing. We're gonna start actually with the title of the episode, and that's gonna lead us into some discussions about things that happened in the episode, and then we'll circle back around because we have an even bigger mystery we want to unpack, and so forth. But let's start with the title. Dreams and Madness is chapter 7 of this saga. So whose dreams are they? And where's the madness come from? Well, if you were paying attention in last week's episode, it's a reference to a line from Balin's Skull, that the planet Paradea that they find themselves on in the second half of this season is a place of dreams and madness, and the substance of folklore and myth when you were brought up in the Jedi Temple. But if you were to literally apply, why is that title appropriate for this penultimate chapter? And I think you find some interesting things there. The dreams, of course, Ezra Bridger wanting to reunite with his friends and go home, as well as Grand Admiral Thrawn wanting to exile himself from this perceived wasteland. I think that very much succinctly sums up where the dreams side of it is. What intrigued me was the madness part, because Balin's Skull has revealed in these later episodes that he is on a different path than even his own apprentice. And he searches for something that he may or may not discover on this world, something that could break the endless cycle, Jedi and Sith, light and darkness, and so forth. And he seems very much at peace that he's on the right path, even if it is still murky and opaque to our viewers. So is he been touched by the madness? But really, I think it's his apprentice, Shin Hati, who in the course of this episode, and this is where we begin our discussion, has basically two betrayals and two abandonments in one. First, her master basically releases her from his charge rather unexpectedly and suddenly, and says, contact Grand Admiral Thrawn, go and stake your claim in the Empire. And you and I, will go on different paths. And he actually says a line that should be used by soccer and football and volleyball coaches everywhere the world round. Impatience for victory will guarantee defeat. And that's one of his final lessons to Shin Hati, who goes ahead and follows her master's wisdom and leads a charge against Ezra Bridger and Sabine Wren and the Noti, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But when plans upend and the good guys get the upper hand, then she finds herself now at their mercy, and she's surprised by an act of mercy. For it's Ahsoka Tano who has arrived in the galaxy and says to her, you don't have to run, I can help you, and offers her hand in friendship. And the look of horror and incredulity on Shin's face, I think, really qualifies as some of the madness, because she has been told by her master how terrible the Jedi became and how they must be sworn enemies and so forth. And what was fascinating to me is there's almost a parallel with sort of a Darth Maul here, who was Palpatine's apprentice during the prequel trilogy. Shin Hati feels like Darth Maul with empathy, or the possibility of empathy, whereas Maul was sort of a formidable, not to reduce him, but a comic book presence with a fearsome lightsaber and terrific makeup. He was from the planet Dathomir, which is where the Night Sisters on this planet are also from. He's one of their race, hence the tattooed face and the like. But here is a case where they can kind of redo the Darth Maul apprentice story, yearning for their place. Now is our time. Now we will reveal ourselves. But more complicated emotions playing through here. I see Balin now, finally, as his arc has revealed itself to us slowly over these episodes. He's more like a Count Dooku. He's someone who understands the Jedi Order, at one point had respect for its traditions and its structure, but found that he could not live within those structure, those rules, and chose his own path. And sort of that elegance that he holds himself in, if you remember Christopher Lee's portrayal. And Dave Filoni has brought him back in the Clone Wars animated series and Tales of the Jedi as well. He's not as he's a little more layered, I guess we'd say, than how Palpatine is presented to us in these later chapters of the saga. So I see Balin as kind of a Dooku stand-in, an echo of Dooku, and I see Shin as a potential echo of Darth Maul. Now, what I think this sets up fascinatingly, will she confront her master in this final episode that we're going to get next week? Will it be their conflict and struggle that leads to some form of resolution? Does she feel like, the betrayal, if you will, like he let her go, she was defeated, or she did not claim her victory? So what's going through her head? Will she be able to not be redeemed? And will that push her into a new direction? So I start with that, gentlemen. Your impressions on sort of really two of the most interesting villains we've had in terms of the potential for their emotional and character development. And, with only one episode left, where we think those two specifically, what side of the line they may fall on. Can Shin be saved? Will Balin, how will that go? I throw it out to you gentlemen first.
Well, first of all, you're using words that are way too big tonight, like whatever you're
Incredulity.
Yes, what
yeah,
he said.
whatever. I think you bring up a good point though, and for all of our millions
And millions.
And
of
millions.
fans, I apologize for my very deep Urza Master like voice right now. I'm a tinge under the weather, so I apologize for the bags under my eyes, and my round bulbous head is always like this, but whatever.
They're always here.
Yeah, so it's part of being a graying Jedi.
The Jedi
So-
never sleep.
Yes. So, Mr. Psyllium Maas over there, Master Psyllium Maas, brings up a great point because I'm assuming that Ahsoka is going to kill Balin, and it never crossed my mind that Shin might be the one who actually does it, and maybe it's going to... Okay, this is leading me to a point, so maybe I'll go to the point and I'm going to come back to this. I think part of this episode is to show Thrawn is really good at strategery, right? Like, he's this really good strategist. We've heard about it before, so I think they kind of made a point to kind of show that, right? Like, he can outthink everybody. He's 3 or 4 steps ahead. So I think that was part of the point of this episode. With that being said, he could tell Shin that part of her way of becoming, a Sith Lord or something like that is defeating her master. I mean, he could pull that, because I could see her being very conflicted about wanting to kill him, right? There's definitely a bond there. And to your Dooku idea or your Dooku thoughts, I think there's almost an aura of dignity with Dooku and with Balin, right? They're dignified. They're kind of like the best spoken, best dressed Jedi at the table, in a sense, where they are very specific with their thoughts. They're very well thought. Their thoughts are very well thought out, and they're specific with what they say. They don't waste their words. Just their appearance, right? I think it holds this aura of lending itself to the Jedi in terms of being dignified, but while carving their own path. And it kind of stinks because we know Balin's not going to make it, because we know what happened to the actor. So, I think it would be a twist if Shin does kill him. But again, it could raise her up to a Sith Lord-like type status if that winds up going down.
I thought that there
Go
might
ahead.
be a way to keep Balin, not obviously with the late Ray Stevenson being able to continue the role, but you see what's going on with Captain Enoch and some of the night troopers and so forth. So whether they had planned this all along, or maybe this could be an 11th hour change if that's the way they want to go, it would seem to me that Balin could evolve or transform into something else. Even going so far as the Night Sisters use it reanimating, but again, it wouldn't necessarily be the Balin we were used to seeing, but he could become the Kylo Ren type, if we never saw Adam Driver's head. There are ways to keep that character and perhaps, keep him along. It just wouldn't be quite the same. I don't know. I have no insight
Right.
as to whether that's going, but that is a possibility if they're not just going to do a straight, okay, and then you're done. Ursa, or Uther, whoever's.
No, I was just gonna say, I didn't know if it was. I don't know how much you know this, because we do tend to break a lot of news and have some inside information here at the Graying Jedi, which is why you should click subscribe and leave your comments below. Yeah. So I don't know if we know this. Do we know that Balin was gonna die before the actor unfortunately passed away, or was it already known that he was written out of the script?
No,
Do we even know that?
I don't. He passed after the show had was in post production and was completed.
Okay.
And there's been, as we know, there's been no formal announcement as to what happens next.
Okay.
With the strike ending, with all of that, could they, on the heels of a well-received finale, that's what they did with Loki, with Marvel. after the season 1 finale of Loki, they made sure to say right away, "You're getting season 2." So,
Right.
well, I mean, if they don't do that, that doesn't mean it couldn't happen. But I feel like we'll get a real sense of a direction next week, not only in potential cliffhangers, but what their plans are.
So I'm making an assumption that Balin dies, and I probably shouldn't do that because it's not really necessarily written into the script, as far as we know.
Right. Now, yeah, at this point, yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, exactly.
My bad. So unsure. But let's turn it over to the guy, to the true Jedi Master, probably the leader of this council, who for some reason, I don't know if he's got the writing room bugged, whether it's the Warp Core podcast, which you should go over to that channel and click and subscribe and like and share it with your friends. Or it's Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear, which makes its return this week. But, this Urza guy seems to always know where these stories are going. So I got to throw it over to you there, sir. And
he's not even wrinkly and green.
No, yeah, good point. Good point.
Foundling I am not. So, call me crazy.
Crazy.
But yet again, we've come to this grand impasse of what happens next. And I think, again, we have Balin who's walking away from the main storyline. This storyline, as you may perceive, has every echo of every other Star Wars storyline that's ever happened. Against impossible odds, the Jedi find themselves in a minor victory with a grander pickle about to slip through their fingers. And as we know from Star Trek lore, when your grip is at its tightest, it will slip through your fingers. Here we are again. But Balin has tracked in a different direction, seeking something that is calling out to him. Where else in the series have we seen something calling out to a Force-sensitive person? The world between worlds. On the last planet we were on. And here we are again, with the gateway to the world between worlds, presumably not far off. Beyond that, I would also posit, we have a Force-sensitive who's lived on this planet for some time. That is sans lightsaber, no blasters, living with hermit crabs, and somehow has eluded Grand Admiral Thrawn, who has this giant ship that could bombard the whole surface of the planet if he wanted. Where has he really been hiding out? Well, if there is indeed a doorway to the world between worlds, it's possible he may have received some training there, maybe from other Jedi from the past. There's also the allusion to the Force Ghost with the recordings of Anakin Skywalker. And again, we think about verbal economy and diction. And I go back to the fact that they are not wasting a single word. And I really could see this being that moment where Balin is left behind, locates the world between worlds, and seeks his discovery elsewhere. Meanwhile, at the Hall of Super Best Friends, the Jedi who aren't being called to this world between worlds and are seeking to stop Thrawn before he escapes very well may narrowly fail again. And now they're stranded. But are they stranded? There's that gateway, the world between worlds. And now they're going to be stranded with Shin Hati, who's going to be left behind at the order of Grand Admiral Thrawn, because he's not her concern, or she's not his concern. His concern is getting the H out of Texas. So they're going to take off. She's going to be abandoned yet again. And now she's going to be like, Shinbean City, maybe? But with our heroes stranded in this galaxy far, far away, the villain's off to the galaxy far, far away where they want to get back to save it. Hera and, of course, the New Republic, now cognizant of the fact that this threat is really out there and has to do something, I go back to the very opening of this episode, where they spoke directly of Mandalore. What about Mandalore? What about Mandalore? Well, we have this group of unlikely allies that could rise up against a Grand Admiral Thrawn and his minions, and their fight may eventually join with the good fight of our friends who somehow make it back from this galaxy far, far away, and or someone travels to get them, and or potentially our guy Balin, who spends time in this world between worlds educating himself on the way to break the cycle, maybe through training, maybe through transformation. Now he joins ranks with these hodgepodge Boken Jedi and Mandalorians and space cowboys and the very, very attractive General Hera and her rebel allies, and launches their final assault against Grand Admiral Thrawn to usher in whatever era comes next. Or that story runs parallel with Lord Uther's favorite trilogy, the sequels, and
That's why
as they're having their Grand Admiral Thrawn storyline play out, Rey is having her storyline play out. The Force sensitives connect with Rey. Rey wanders off to Tatooine to bury her lightsaber, and then the whole thing comes full circle in one big final battle, thus ending the cycle, allegedly.
Fascinating.
which lines up with what you had said before about we really don't know what could be going on in the other part of the galaxy. You never. It's like any war. I was actually explaining this to my students the other day because they get very confused about wars and battles. They don't understand that the battles make up the war, right? Mm-hmm. And they also don't understand that there are concurrent battles going on. They think it's a battle happened and then this battle happens and this. I'm like, no, there could be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 battles going on,
Or more.
or more, right? So this group, especially back then, right? This group doesn't know what's happening with this group, doesn't know what's happening here. The communication takes a long time, which would line up with you, right? So just because we know our heroes are fighting in this god-awful trilogy over here, a much better fight in movies are happening here with Thrawn. I mean, that could very well be a part of it, that there are all these separate battles going on. So I think it's a very solid point.
Intriguing.
Can I ask you a question? Because I can't. I always have to. Are you bringing Mark Hamill back if you go to that point as a Luke Skywalker? Like, are you dragging him into this? We just dragged C-3PO back into this right now, right? So
Which is a great cameo.
I agree 100%.
And a future point in a couple of minutes, but go on. Do the Mark Hamill
Okay,
question.
so are we bringing any of our? I guess we don't though, right? Because if the Thrawn battle is happening while the sequel battle is happening, Luke's not there. I just destroyed my own argument or thought process.
Maybe not there for the conclusion, but that's not to say he may not have a part to play.
Okay.
Likewise, we've got the span of about 20 years, so a lot can happen in 20 years. I mean, this could be a battle that takes place, say, 19 years ago. Luke Skywalker happens to be there. He lends a hand in some way, and Thrawn is defeated but not destroyed. Win the battle, the war goes on. And then you could even have the whole sequel trilogy take place, and Thrawn being the, sort of architect that he is, maybe biding his time. He watches this rise of the First Order, and he's realizing that the ultimate flaw here is this reliance on the dark side as a guiding force, where it could be much more effective if it's divorced from the Force. An amoral force, if you will.
So do you think? So do you? If you're a writer in the room, and you're with Filoni, and you want to take this in a sense to the new Rey trilogy that's coming out, right? Because I still think it's gonna take us in that direction, right? Okay. I think it's going in that direction somehow.
Yeah.
Do you keep Thrawn around that long? I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts? Do you try and keep him around like that, where he suffers a defeat here or there, but he's still around? Do you knock him off before we get to Rey? What are your thoughts on that?
I think Jedi Master Psyllium Maas may have some words on that.
I think we want to see Thrawn ascendant. I mean, let's think about how Marvel handled their big bad with Thanos and so forth. He would show up in guest appearances and post-credit sequences and so forth, just building until they finally gave him the upper hand, literally. And then it looked as if all was lost for our heroes, who then had to, literally scrape and claw their way back in time in order to defeat him. So the thing about Thrawn we have to remember, especially for being introduced into the canon now, taken from the books and the comic books and so forth, we haven't seen him sort of at his best. In Rebels, he was, the commander of the Chimera and so forth, and he had various skirmishes with this crew of Sabine and Hera and Ezra and so forth. And then he was carted off by the Purgles and disappeared. And so now, presumably, I think it would be a stretch to say that they're not going to prevent him from returning, because I think the whole thing is he's going to return. So then we're going to need him as sort of a Vader-like influencer in the galaxy to be a threat to the New Republic. But, he doesn't like to get his hands dirty. He's, as we say, a technician, a tactician, a strategician. I'm just making up words here. He sits there. He just sits there and commands the armies. He's not picking up a blaster and joining them. So you can leave him out of the fray, so to speak. Like, he doesn't have to engage in single combat with lightsabers and the like Vader would, and put his own neck at risk. I mean, he can be the Palpatine sitting on the proverbial throne, if you will. But I think we're going to need to see him seemingly have the upper hand, however that expresses itself, so we can get a real sense of his menace and his power. And being from the Chiss species out there in the unknown regions, we have no idea what his lifespan is or so forth. We live 900 years like Yoda, 400 years like Chewbacca, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it can work with the math. It would be a shame and an anticlimax to see him defeated so soon. I'd like to keep him around and have him get the best of, the good guys for a little while before they pull it together. And I thought this episode, while we're on Thrawn, helps fill in for people who aren't familiar with this character even more. Uther referred to his strategy of, let's push her out of the asteroid field and so forth. But he's just, again, implacable. He doesn't shout when he's confronted with bad news or something. He just maintains that sort of dry tone. And it's wonderful. I think Lars Mikkelsen, his voice does 70% of the work for the character, and then the visual design being the rest of it there. But again, he's not a buff bodybuilder type. He's a little pudgy. He's, what have you, however we made fun of him last week. He's just genuinely creepy, right? He's like the bounty hunter Cad Bane, who was featured in the Book of Boba Fett, you're just like, I don't want to run into this guy in any kind of alley, let alone if it was light or dark. And I just think that we need to see what his plan is here. We need to see what he's been storing on the Chimera with the help of the witches. And like I say, the more I see Thrawn triumph, then it helps build our heroes up, because they have to reach that much deeper in order to defeat him. So I would like to see that. But that when you mentioned C-3PO and Anakin Skywalker, you raised my big point of this episode. First of all, it was a joy to see 77-year-old Anthony Daniels in his first role back in the suit since Rise of Skywalker 2019. No one person has been a bigger contributor to Star Wars than Anthony Daniels, who has done all 9 Skywalker films. He appeared briefly in Rogue One. He's done animated shows. He's done the fan celebrations. He's written book. Like, this guy gets it, and I'm sure there are actors in the Star Trek firmament who have embraced that as well. James Doohan or Takai, or like people who just, they know how much joy their character and their presence has brought to the fans. And so if they pick up the phone and say, Tony, will you do a cameo? And he's going to be like, sure. What time do you want me on set? I mean, that was great. It was great hearing him drop Leia's name. Granted, it's a Deus Ex Machina and it gets Hera off the hook. But that leads me to my point, which is about fan service, as the internet likes to call it. Because there seems to be this thing, if you go online and read these things and read about Marvel and DC and all that, there's always people who take 5 minutes and 40 paragraphs to complain about, oh, the nostalgia, oh, the fan service, C-3PO showing up to save Hera's, bacon, come on. And I have to ask you, gentlemen on the council, what is fan service for, if not for the fans? Which of us sat here when we watched this episode and did not delight in seeing C-3PO, or hearing Leia Organa's name, or seeing Hayden Christensen again as a young Anakin Skywalker training his Padawan? I guess my point is, maybe there is a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. I haven't found that line for me, because as a fan of Star Wars, or as a fan of any franchise, I thrill when I get a shout out, an Easter egg, a callback, an appearance, a cameo. I mean, that's just the whole point of why you want to do these things, right? I mean, it allows you to connect all of the threads and the tissues and so forth. And so for me, like, I don't think there's such a thing as, quote, bad fan service. There's ways you can elevate it, like when Luke Skywalker takes off an entire, squadron of dark troopers. I mean, that's an amazing moment in and of itself, but also the thrill of seeing Luke, in his Jedi prime. So I ask you, gentlemen, like, what does fan service mean to you, and does it bother you, like when C-3PO shows up or what have you? I'm honestly curious, because we are fans. Like, what does it all mean?
But I think season 3 of Picard is the perfect one. I'm going to give you a couple.
Sure.
Season 3 of Picard, we talked about how that was probably some fan service at its best, because the writing was so great, and though there was some cheese there, it wasn't this overwhelming cheese. Like, I still think it needs to be done right. For example, if Luke Skywalker would have showed up to save Grogu and had some blue milk and was drinking that as he walked in, he's like, oh, I'm here to pick up the kid, and didn't fight those droids or whatever, that's the wrong way to do it. I mean, I think there's a way it has to be done. Like, even when C-3PO came in, that could have gone sideways too. And they made it purposeful, and they were still even able to bring Leia into the mix, which, again, just another great callback. I'm going to say this too, and there's been some rumors out there, I don't think it's been confirmed. After seeing Hayden Christensen just in this little hologram talking to Ahsoka, if they don't give him his own series with the young Ahsoka fighting in the Clone Wars, they are doing themselves a disservice as a Star Wars franchise, because this guy has again continues to prove that he's got the acting chops and can still pull the character off, even though he's 20 years older than the character should be. And yeah, I know there's de-aging and all that stuff going on, whatever with that. And they've gone backwards so many times before. Who cares if you go back and redo some Clone Wars stuff, but and do the live action thing? I just think I think that would be great to see. So I do think that has to be done right. That's why I was bringing up the whole idea of like, do you bring Mark Hamill back if you do another, if you do this gathering of the Super Friends like Urza Master talked about to take on Thrawn? Do you bring him back in some way or another? But I still think it needs to be purposeful. That's what was beautiful about Mandalorian, and the only good thing about Book of Boba Fett is that the Luke Skywalker stuff was very purposeful and was giving us a Luke Skywalker that I think we all wanted to see. Because again, I know we'll get to the movies at some point. That's one of my biggest problems with with those movies. That's not. I don't think that's Luke Skywalker completely, and that's why I struggle with that. And it's a waste, in my opinion. I'll stop there.
We'll see what Ursa thinks of fans.
I'm listening.
I love
agree
fan
with you, that's
service.
right. What's that?
And I love fan service. I am a Mark through and through. I don't care if it's Hulk Hogan coming back at 75 years old to wrestle The Rock, or The Rock coming back at far too old to wrestle John Cena, or John Cena coming back to wrestle LA Knight or whatever. I love that stuff. I eat it up. I don't care if it's Expendables 4. I don't care if it's Star Trek Picard Season 3, or if it's, Jerry Ryan getting her own series as captain in Star Trek Legacy. I love it. I think as a fan, you're never quite done with the characters, right? There's certain characters that the storyline feels complete. And the best characters, the storyline never truly feels complete. Even if it is, quote unquote, a full story. You've heard everything. You've never really heard everything. And that's the beauty of fan fiction. And I know people hate fan fiction, but the beauty of it is you can explore the things that, if done well, never got explored. And we still have quite a bit of that with Star Wars. Now, granted, there are shows that, can't do that. Or, you may not feel done with the characters, but the characters are done. You look at our favorite sitcoms, or our favorite dramas, where it's okay, these are shows that, look, it's played out. And unfortunately, I think some people look at Supernatural that way, although I'm a hardcore believer that show could still run for another about 5 seasons. I've got it all up here. Call me. With or without the Winchester franchise. But you look at shows that are hugely popular, and some of them get revivals of Futurama or the X-Files. There were more stories to tell, or ways to tell more stories that were compelling and entertaining. And even if they appealed to a slightly smaller audience, it's still millions of people. And there are shows that enjoyed a revival that people who were skeptical or didn't watch the first time, years later picked it up on streaming or went out and bought a physical copy, which everybody should always do. Support physical media. I think fan service is great. It does depend entirely upon how well written it is. I think one of the flaws with some of the revival types, if you will, is the writing. And I look to, unfortunately, the X-Files. I think there was some flaws with the way they painted a couple of the characters that would have allowed that franchise to do more unique things. I like what they did with it. I'm a fan, but it could have been better. And I think that's why it didn't go any farther than it did, even though it had every right to do whatever it wanted. I think that's why you never really got a great Cheers revival. I think that's why a Frasier revival will work. And I'm looking forward to it. But, for Star Wars, you have this gap that they've created now that you can fill with all these intriguing storylines of what happens to Grogu, what happens to Din Djarin, what happens to why does her name escape me right now? I'm just enamored with her and I can't think of her name.
Sabine. Hera.
Not Sabine, from The Mandalorian.
Bo-Katan.
The female that was with Boba Fett.
Bo-Katan, thank you. Bo-Katan. Like, there's a lot of Mandalorian stories yet to be told in the interim before the First Order and the Rey storyline. Luke Skywalker, too, before he goes off to start his own academy, what pushes him to do that? You know, I know it's kind of his passion. He's seeking out Force sensitives, but there are still other Force users out there that he hasn't run into. There are plenty of new Force users being born. What brings him to this storyline? What happens during that? Do we get to see a young Kylo Ren and a young Jason Mendoza, or whatever his last name is? Shout out to The Good Place. Love that show. Was not done with those characters. Cried like a baby when that show ended. Great writing. The cool thing you could do there is really actually have a new Jedi Academy series. You could do it with the CGI Luke Skywalker. He doesn't even really need to be there. That's kind of the cool thing. Like, with the Karate Kid, you only really need so much Mr. Miyagi. You can pull Mr. Miyagi out of most of that film and get a huge amount of story with just the characters that should drive it. Because we don't know what happens to Jason in the long run. We don't know if these characters ever do actually make it back. And if they do, we don't know how, where, or why. They haven't played out in the Rey trilogy. And I'd like to think that there's a lot of big stuff that happens there. How does Snoke rise to power? How does the First Order come to power? Does Thrawn have something to do with that? Because Thrawn strikes me as the kind of person who wants to get the heat off of him so he can really consolidate his power. Why not seek out the Emperor? Why not? You know, there's a very good chance that he's the one who starts catalyzing that. You know, and he may be aware of Palpatine's situation. We really don't know a whole lot about him. Not to mention, why does he want to leave this galaxy? That still remains unanswered. There's still a lot to dig up there, and then you can introduce literally anything you want into Star Wars from that galaxy. All you have to do is ride the whales. Why not have a whale rider tie-in? Great movie. So, as far as fan service goes, look, the sky is the limit. It's all in how you craft that story. A lot of people like to complain that these stories didn't need to be told. They didn't need to do anything with the original Star Wars trilogy. It was perfect as it was. As perfect as it was prior to the digitization, there's still a lot of story to tell. Like, you don't get the fandom as vicious as they are without allowing for growth. And that was never George Lucas's intention, was to limit it to 3 movies. He never intended for that. Now, did he intend for us to get some of the things we got with the prequels? No. I think he did some of that to kind of lay into this or that, but he wasn't dealing with the same parameters as we can today. He was bound by a big toy industry. And I think, frankly, the way you market a movie has changed. You have a lot more adult people who will take in a PG-13 movie of this caliber because it's Star Wars. I think even in the late 90s, when the prequels came out, you really had to appeal heavy to children. Because there was no guarantee that anybody from the late 70s through the mid-80s was going to go back and see a Star Wars movie. Why? You know, besides the convention people who were going to see anything they put out no matter what, they were really cultivating a new generation of fans. And they did that with the sequels too, but they were also trying to give fan service, not just to maximize the almighty dollar, but because it's the right thing to do for the story. Because you can craft something unique and individual. But I go to the end of the road. You know, all stories have been told. How do you tell a new story? They're all the same. At some point, everything is the same. And I will always defend this, that 50 First Dates and The Notebook are the exact same movie. They are the exact same movie. But 50 First Dates came first. Star Wars can easily regurgitate any story they want to tell, but they can make it different by leveraging brand new characters in brand new ways.
Outstanding.
Well, and we don't know where was Grogu and Jason during the sequels. They could be in this. They could be in this other galaxy. We don't know that. Who knows what's going on? Or they could have survived and just been somewhere else. That's what I love about what you brought up last week, and I'm probably going to be referencing this a lot in our multiple podcasts that we have. Is that I think, I think that's just how it is, right? You see a movie and you think everything is just happening right here, and there's nothing else happening anywhere else. It's just right here. No, those things can be happening, and I think that also might be a nice little thing that Star Wars can kind of establish, that there are other things going on outside of what was going on in our core characters, and what's happening with them is just as important as what was happening with our core characters. It has an impact on the overall story arc in a sense. So I think that is something that can happen, because again, Ezra could still be around when the sequels are. We don't know. So I think that's a really good point. I didn't know if you picked up on this, but I was reading as well. I'm jumping back to Balin for a second. Maybe this is some kind of fan service. I don't know. But I guess on his wrist, in whatever the Star Wars writing is called, it had Han's name, Luke's name, Chewie, R2-D2.
In the language of Orobish? Oh, interesting. I did not pick that up. Wow. Yeah, so there's rumors, or there's theories out there. Was that a hit list? Was those people that he felt like he needed to contact to break this cycle? Did he think killing them was going to break the cycle? I don't know, but that was on his wrist. That's a good.
So something for you guys to think about.
Interesting.
Think about that.
Again, it's the economy of characterization. Those are details they don't add for no reason. It could just be a Mickey Mouse in the background, like in Tron 2.
Oh, but I think that's the other thing we're seeing a lot more now when it comes to, it's the purposeful, like you're saying, the purposeful placement of detail that your fans are going to pick up now, especially with the internet, right? So that's not there for any old, there's purpose for that.
Well, and they're going to pull anything and everything. And that's why you really have to clue in on these textual clues, because look at what they did with the Avengers, right? Everybody was speculating, what are they going to realistically do? Like, there had to be some kind of resolution. Who knows what they're going to do? There was really no way at the time to predict it. They couldn't even predict the title. And then they pulled one of the most random words out of the entire script, Endgame. We're in the Endgame now. And that was the tie-in to the title, and it's like, oh, Doctor Strange knew, but they couldn't tell you the title because the internet would figure it out. Which, by the way, there can be only one, and the true Endgame is Highlander Endgame. Thank you very much.
Nice. All right, so some rapid-fire ideas here that I throw back at all of you. Grab them out of the boat if they swim close enough for you to catch. I thought that the director, Jita Patel, I thought this was a fantastic episode. I think all the directors of this show have kept the action moving and flowing, but this one was just one breathless kind of chase, almost from the jump. If you excuse the courtroom stuff in the very beginning, but everything was just moving so quickly. And again, to contrast with, like, let's say your average Star Trek episode, whereas this one doesn't have time to sit there and ruminate on the human condition or themes or so forth. This is Star Wars doing what Star Wars does best, which is intergalactic action, interspersed with the political side, interspersed with the moments taken straight from the Ewoks. I know you guys made fun last week of having logs and so forth, but there are the Noti ineffectively trying to counter the Marauders with rocks and throwing things at them.
Which is fan service, by the way.
And adorable. So I thought that the entire episode was just basically a thrill ride, a Disneyland ride, a roller coaster ride, and that's all it ever intended to be. It was never supposed to illuminate or give us any deeper thing than just here's 46 minutes, strap in and hang on for the ride. Nor would it be mistaken, like Strange New Worlds has shown us. It's not an individual episode that builds to a full whole. It's a chapter in an ongoing story. And I think once all of these episodes drop in a show like this, I think it's fun to go back and watch them with a little bit, so you're not waiting week to week and you get 2, 3, or 4. I'm not usually a binger type, but you can see the flow and the progression, I think, clearer once you've got them all, once you can kind of pick up a head of steam there. So I do recommend that to fans that haven't done that. Like I say, you don't need to stay up all night on a Tuesday and doing it, but if you watch a couple of these back to back and so forth, you start to feel those rhythms. Again, love the C-3PO. The courtroom scene proves that the New Republic, again, is an ineffective bureaucracy, and which makes me sad, because after blowing up 2 Death Stars, you want them to succeed, but we just know by virtue of the First Order coming to power that this experiment in social democracy is going to end poorly. We'll still have our resistance fighters, our Hans and our Leias and Poe Damerons and the like, Rey. But yeah, this experiment is doomed, and that's a shame. But we can see the writing on the wall, no matter how.
But don't you?
No matter how good a Mon Mothma or a Leia Organa is.
So I guess here's a question then, because this was my take on the sequels. I felt like the Republic was still there, but you had the Rebellion, the First Order, kind of fighting on the outside of it. Am I imagining things?
No, you're
was
right.
That wrong?
No, the way that the sequels,
that?
the way that the sequels perceived it, and now they're sort of filling in some of that their backstory, is that Leia, she had a role like Mon Mothma. She had a powerful role in the New Republic, and then like political subterfuge. This was in a novel called Bloodline, written by Claudia Gray, if you're interested. Someone leaks that she's Darth Vader's daughter. And of course, the galaxy is aghast. It's the biggest political scandal, and basically sidelines Leia from any real power or voice in the new government. And they do it, again, as like a political, like a dirty trick. They reveal, and then there's posters on Coruscant, that say traitor and, daughter of killer.
That's actually a good storyline.
And so, Leia goes on, as we meet her in the sequels, she's like the resistance, but she encounters a lot of resistance from people like Senator Giono, whom we saw in this episode here. And the question is, are they going along with it because they're willfully ignorant, or are they just not clued in to how deep a rot the First Order or Thrawn or the Imperial remnants are? I mean, don't forget, in The Mandalorian, we saw Moff Gideon and a Shadow Council, plotting the return of Thrawn and so forth. And we saw in that episode with the Doctor. And so, there's Imperial decay and corruption sort of embedded in here already. So it was always going to be an uphill climb for this, fledgling democracy. But like I say, you come off the high of Return of the Jedi with dancing Ewoks and fireworks, and then just to realize that for the next 15 to 20 years, you're basically stuck in like a DMV. Like it's just
It's the Weimar Republic.
right.
So
if you will.
Yes,
Yes, exactly.
there's a power vacuum, and they're chasing their tail, trying to set up a utopia, but really creating a dystopia by not being able to effectively come together and follow a 14-point plan that probably would have created that utopia.
There you go.
And then, of course, that brings rise to, fascism, to this imperialist slash, I guess Nazi parallel, which is what the Empire always was.
Right.
And, that's why Indiana Jones and Han Solo are the same guy, right?
Well, that's why they're called stormtroopers.
Exactly.
The whole reason why they picked.
Sturmabteilung.
Yeah.
It's not anything, really fresh and new, and they engage in the same tactics, and it's because it works. Those are things that work to capture the masses, and I think there's a couple different routes one could take in the future to spin familiar stories in the Star Wars universe that would be cyclical and play into this whole Balin idea that everything tends to repeat itself, doesn't really matter what you do. That's actually true, and that's Joseph Campbell. Like that's the hero's journey. It's a continuous cycle, night and day, over and over and over until the end of time. The nice thing about the Force and the mysticism of Star Wars versus the Star Trek, where this is able to keep going because existence continues to keep going. And yeah, you're going to have the same big bad aliens versus the good guys, and ship battles and discoveries and exploration. That's never going to stop. Star Wars, on the other hand, they can engage the mystic. They can engage ways to actually stop history from repeating itself, and just have it come in a new iteration, which is different enough. That's the beauty of the Force. Rey is all the Jedi. The Sith are all the Sith. When they're gone, and or when one of them is gone, it creates a power vacuum. Who better to fill that vacuum than a Grand Admiral Thrawn, who represents the evil divorced from the Force, the other evil mysticism of, let's say, the universe at this point. Likewise, I still am not convinced that he's not running scared. And as much as he's definitely conniving, he's seeking power, he's looking to reestablish himself in a position of power, he would not admit that his numbers have thinned to anyone unless he knew or was very confident that he was getting away from whatever caused his numbers to dwindle. Because his numbers didn't just dwindle because of one Ezra Bridger. That's just, it's utterly impossible.
Right.
And it wasn't just because they got thrown to a planet and starvation or this or that. We know that's not going to be the case. It's too easy. There is definitely something out there that has resulted in this, and I truly believe it's going to be Balin that is the one that discovers it. Our heroes may get home following Thrawn. There may not be a conclusion to the Thrawn versus Ahsoka storyline here. I'm guessing we're going to be left with some kind of a cliffhanger. But Balin is really the one that's driving this story, and always has been. It may be named Ahsoka, but it's definitely about Balin. Because Balin is the one who's going to find what he thinks is calling to him to end this cycle. And I hearken back to a novel I read once, written in the Star Wars universe, where a pseudo-psychic race reached out in an effort to ensnare new prey, to end their cycle of suffering and tech them. So I really think that there is some potential here that we might be looking at the introduction of a new big bad that steps in to fill that void. How do they know about this galaxy that they've never been to because they've been in this galaxy the whole time? Balin. Balin thinks he's reaching out to something that's going to end this cycle of death and destruction. And as all good-intentioned paths are paved with, he's going to run right into the next thing that could threaten the whole galaxy.
I just want to piggyback off of that just real quick. I think it's hilarious that Disney, when they first bought all these rights, totally were, they're like, oh, the extent, the EU doesn't exist, and it's all going to be a bunch of, whatever they were like saying it was going to be myths or
Legends,
things like that. Yeah, they're pulling so much stuff from all those writings. I mean, it's great, but I just think it's very funny that they were totally trying to distance themselves from it at first, and now they're embracing it, which, quite frankly, it's a great thing that they're embracing it because it's added a lot to these stories. The idea is that... sorry, last point. It's nice that you don't have to go You don't have to rely on 2 or 3 people to come up with this, that you can pull from all these different authors and all these different ideas, and you're pulling the very best of those stories to make content that's important to fans like us that started a YouTube channel and are rebranding their website and bringing together councils that can speak to you about just the beautiful things in Star Wars and Star Trek and football. Click the like button, subscribe.
And I just want to throw out there,
Don't forget Texas.
I just want to throw out there, as a fan of Rebels and knowing these characters, I love what I'm getting early from Ezra. It's unpredictable. I really expected him to take his lightsaber back from Sabine and show us that he was this, badass Jedi. And he's like, no, I don't need it. And he's just using like force pushing and like his wits until he needs a blaster to fight off the night troopers that are surrounding him or so forth. And even in that great moment, which is very in the spirit of a scoundrel like Han Solo, where they're all about to shoot him, she's like, destroy them. And he's like, wait, don't you want to talk? Like, should we? Like, I mean, and like I say, that very much, for fans of the character and so forth, it very much is the voice, and obviously because it's Filoni, he's writing it. But you can hear that, and maybe I'm imagining it, but Sabine and Hera and Ezra and these live action guys, you can tell the actors and actresses, like, they did their homework. Like, their speech patterns, they may not physically resemble exactly what their animated, counterparts did, but they're trying to behave and emote and give us, this impression that really, aside from being one drawn with computer pixels and one flesh and blood, that these are the same characters. You don't feel like a disconnect, like, well, that's not really what Ezra would do, or that's not really how Sabine would behave. Like, in my mind, these characters are staying true to themselves, however experienced you are with them. So, and boy, again, I hate to objectify, but I mean, there's some very pretty faces on both sides of the gender equation here. Just a really good looking cast overall.
Yeah, that Huang robot is something to look at.
And he is.
All right, let's rate these.
He is fantastic. I mean, he is like
He
K2,
is.
K2SO.
That is probably one of the droids are, and they, again, economy of words, right? Droids are highly underrated in the Star Wars universe, and they always seem to play a massive key to whatever is going on in any iteration of Star Wars. And they're always just taking a number 2 on them, like, especially like the dipsticks that you're like, ugh, I don't like this guy. Like our Senator, what's his nuts, right away. How dare we? How can we trust a droid? Well, let me educate you, good sir. I have to say, like, I get a kick out of that. I love the comedy of the droids. They were always intended to be comic relief, but also sort of represent sort of these abstract emotions in a concrete, digestible way, which I absolutely adore. Like, Lucas did a great job. Filoni's doing a fantastic job too. So let's rate it. Like Lord Uther said, let's draw swords together.
Oh my!
Whatever it takes.
And let's compare colors. I have not yet started.
Oh.
So I'm gonna go first. And to remind our millions
And millions
of fans and subscribers, and if you're not, which 98% of you are not, so I would highly encourage you hit that bell button for notifications after you subscribe. Keep up to date with the Graying Jedi, with the Warp Core podcast, with Cut the Cheese, Poke the Bear, and your good friend Hank Hill here. Make sure you're with Pending Rebrand every step of the way. Fellas, we could give this a red lightsaber and say, this didn't work for me. We could give this a blue lightsaber and say, this feels like a good episode, but it's not the best. We can give this a purple lightsaber, Mace Windu. Somewhere in between good and great. But kind of with a bit of an edge of, I wish there was a little more tangy zip to this Miracle Whip green lightsaber to illustrate the Luke Skywalkers we know of old and the Yodas, if you will. I have yet to give a white lightsaber rating.
Interesting.
And I'm going to throw it out to you fellas here. I'm going to give this a white
An
lightsaber.
Ahsoka White.
An Ahsoka White. And here's what I mean by that. This episode is very much a vehicle. It does not do a lot to advance much of the story.
Agreed.
This is the immediate action episode. It's not filler because it's impactful and it's important. And again, the economy of screen time, words, imagery, and characterization, I think, is just incredibly poignant. So I don't want to give a vehicle episode a green lightsaber, but I also wouldn't give this any lower than a green lightsaber. And I think we have to create a separate from our usual variations of the Force lightsaber, perhaps a gray area.
I was just going to say that.
Hello there. I think this episode was successful in every way I would rate any other green lightsaber episode, but I feel like it's the first half of a two-parter. There it is, there it is. And I give it the white lightsaber because there are two white lightsabers, and we only have one so far. And I have a feeling, a familiar feeling, that the next episode, the conclusion of this series, episode 8 of Ahsoka on Disney Plus, is going to give us something we as Star Wars fans have not seen since... And that's going to be pretty special.
I will go... It's going to go purple, but then he kind of... So I will go with your new white or gray lightsaber. Look, at Pending Rebrand, we tend to come up with groundbreaking ideas and theories and logical solutions to things. And the one thing we've really established here is the importance of the two-parter that maybe isn't always an intentional two-parter, but it really is a two-parter. This episode is setting up multiple conclusions, which we know that's really just going to be a cliffhanger, right, in the next one. But it's setting up all these arcs to give us a little bit of closure, but obviously it's probably going to open up another door. So to me, this is just the beginning, or the first part of this two-parter that is just going to set it up perfectly for a nice conclusion. So I'll go white as well, because this is definitely a two-part episode. All depends on what that last episode's going to do.
And I was prepared to go tongue depressor green, but then I thought that Urza Master made a very compelling choice. So now I say this episode is as white as an album from Bread. And if you don't know what that is,
Wow.
go look that up.
I have several Bread albums right back there.
There you go. Yes, I will agree with you that, again, in many cases, if you wanted to diminish its impact, you could argue it's a chessboard moving pieces around. But I would argue also that it does so at such a frenetic clip, and you don't spend time. The worst would be spending time thinking they're moving chess pieces around, when in this case, it's only after you've realized how much more we still have to learn that you're like, oh, I get it. We're all set up here. I'll be honest with you. I don't know that I want closure on every. I don't want things loosely tied off. I want just a jam-packed episode next week that again doesn't close doors but leaves multi windows and doors open for us, so that we don't know where we're going to land on which path, and it's not a predictable like, well, I know exactly what they're going to do and I don't need to bother to watch it. So I'm just hoping that we get things that can't be resolved neatly and tidily, and that and that we have jumping off points for any one of, spin-offs, subplots, main plots, guest appearances, whether we're going to see Ahsoka and these characters in Mandalorian Season 4 or in the Jude Law-led Skeleton Crew or beyond. Give me just another 45 minutes where I have a grin on my face, and Kevin Kiner is really doing a job here. Let's not forget, as John Williams will never be replaceable, and he is a legend the world over for all of his contributions to this saga and other film sagas as well. But Kevin Kiner, who has scored a lot of Star Wars with the animated series and so forth, he is doing the film music proud with this, in that it sounds like Star Wars while sounding completely original, and not relying on the same 2 or 3 themes that we're by now. We're not getting the Imperial March when Thrawn marches out, and we're the only time we've gotten the Force theme was when Jason was reaching out to it on Cetos and getting Hera so they're able to create these new musical accompaniments without just relying as a crutch on what we're used to. So yes, Ursa, you have shown us the way. The way is white for this episode. Ahsoka white. Very good.
Yes. And with that, we, the Graying Jedi, bid all of you a force be with you.
Force be with you.